For this session, may I first invite a highly respected and prominent Sharia scholar from Bahrain. He is Sheikh Isam Ishaq, who is the Deputy Chairman at Discover Islam and also that of the Governance and Ethics Boards of AAOIFI. Sheikh Isam will be serving as the chairman of this session. Joining him on the stage will be four panelists. Dr. Ahmed Tahiri Jyoti, CEO at Al Mali Consulting. Mr. Khalid Havaldar, MD and founder of Accreditas. Mr. Khalid, yes. Mr. Saeed, who is Director of Research at ISRA. And Dr. Muhammad Damak, who is the Global Head of Islamic Finance S&P.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. نرحب بالحضور ونبدأ مستعينين بالله هذه الجلسة، وهي بالعنوان الذي أمامكم: مستقبل المصرفية الإسلامية، مرئيات الحضور عن المصرفية الإسلامية خلال 30 سنة القادمة. المتحدثون كل منهم من المتخصصين في هذا الباب، وكل منهم له بصمته في هذا الباب، وتراجمهم موجودة معكم في الأوراق التي بين أيديكم. ونبدأ بورقة يقدمها الدكتور أحمد عن شمالي، ثم سيعلق كل من الحضور على الورقة ويدلي بدلوه. نمر بعد ذلك على بعض النقاط، المسائل المهمة المناسبة، ثم نفتح الباب للتفاعل مع حضراتكم. دكتور أحمد.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين. Ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. First of all, I would like to thank AAOIFI for its kind invitation, and I'm glad to be part of this conference, which is one of the most prestigious conferences in the world of Islamic finance. Let me start my presentation with a postcard that I brought from the past. As you see here, this is a postcard that was elaborated by a French artist called Jean-Marc Coté between 1899 and 1910. Jean-Marc Coté and his collaborators tried to predict the future of the transportation industry. He was confident that by the year 2000, we would have colonized sky and sea and would have recruited some of their residents for our transit purpose. We are in 2018. I don't think that someone here in the hall rode a whale to come to Bahrain. So, which means that predicting the industry future is a perilous adventure. Nevertheless, this exercise is very important for the investors and for the whole industry to know where to invest and when to invest. That's why, rather than predicting how the industry would become, I tried to define how the industry should become. So, as you know, any industry transformation means adopting a new business model that links an emerging market need to a new technology. To understand how this transformation would occur, we need to map all the technologies in the industry itself, but also in the related sectors. Then we need to identify all the players that can influence or be influenced by the new transformation. Then it is very important to measure the potential of every new technology to replace an old one. And then we can identify the new technologies to be introduced in new transformation, the new transformative business model. My presentation would be divided into two parts. The first part is about the challenges that are facing the Islamic banking industry, and second part is about the transformative business model for the next generation of Islamic banks. So the main the major challenge that is facing Islamic banking is the weak market share compared to global finance. Today, Islamic finance represents 0.75% of the global finance. This is due to the limited number of countries that are adopting Islamic finance, but also in the low market share of in some countries where Islamic finance has just been introduced during the last years. So increasing the market share of Islamic finance at a global scale is the major challenge that is hiding minor challenges at local scales. That's why in my presentation I will focus on four main challenges. The four challenges are the regulation challenge, the expansion and the business growth challenge. The third challenge is about the new entrants and the threats that they represent. Then the human resources and talent development challenge. After this, I will establish a SWOT analysis, and the outputs will serve to define the transformative business model of Islamic banks. Today, with Basel III, IFRS 9, with the new regulation like AML, anti-money laundering, with consumer protection, all these regulations would impact the financial performance of banks. Moreover, in many countries, Islamic banking doesn't have a comprehensive regulatory framework, which impact the Sharia credibility sometimes or the financial performance. That's why we need to upgrade our business model and to implement comprehensive regulatory frameworks. I have the research paper that can be shared later by AAOIFI, which gives more details on each of these points. Second challenge is about the business growth. Apart from the Middle East, GCC, Southeast Asia region, I would say that Europe and Africa are seem to be the most interesting regions for expanding Islamic banking for two reasons. The first reason is that we have important Muslim communities that are living in those regions. Second, because we have close economic and commercial links and relationships between these regions and Muslim countries. But it doesn't mean that if you have a business model that works in GCC, it doesn't mean that your business model will work in Europe or in Africa, which means that we have to upgrade our business model again in order to adapt it to each region specificity. If you go to Africa, the constraints, the challenges are totally different from GCC and from Europe. If you go to Europe, the same. So we need to upgrade a business model to be inclusive so that we can adapt it every time we go to a region in order to expand the activity in many regions in the world. And here, globalization seems to be the key word. Globalization is the mixture of global and local. So, in fact, standardization is a very important thing because it brings more transparency to investors, to clients. But globalization can adapt the principles to the local practices and customs. I would say that globalization is what really can make standardization acceptable by everybody. The third challenge is the new entrants. The new entrants, I made an inventory of all the new entrants that are existing today in different regions of the world. There are three types. First, the car manufacturers. I found that most of car manufacturers, they have their own subsidiaries, their own finance companies that are granting loans in order to buy their cars. For example, Toyota, they have their own company, Volkswagen, Renault. All these car makers, they have their own subsidiaries given granting financial services. Second type of new entrants are the telecom operators like M-Pesa, Vodafone, Orange Bank. They are all launching mobile money accounts and mobile wallets. The third type of new entrants are the electronic platforms like Amazon Pay, Google Pay, Apple Pay. There are also other new entrants like Invoice and pay later platforms like Klarna, like RichPay, and which can be assimilated to e-murabaha, to an electronic murabaha after some minor adjustments. There are P2P platforms, peer-to-peer platforms like Lending Club in the US. There are also cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, etc. So these are new entrants. The question here is, what is the type of relationship that can link those new entrants to Islamic banks? Is it about competition or about collaboration? I had many case studies, and I found that it is more about collaboration. For example, finance companies that are belonging to car makers, most of the time they are outsourcing part of their activity to banks. For example, Toyota, Volkswagen, they are always dealing with banks, and sometimes they're just offering white labels for their loans and for their financing services. The same, if we talk about M-Pesa, Vodafone, there are BNP Paribas in France that launched Hello Bank, which resembles to M-Pesa. We have also P2P platforms. For example, Lending Club in US are dealing with banks. So we are moving from P2P platforms, peer-to-peer platforms, to institutions to peer platforms, which means that we are opening a new area of collaboration between new entrants and banks. The fourth challenge is the human resources and talent development. This is very interesting because when you are transforming your business model, sometimes your human resources can be your first constraint, and they can stop and limit your transformation process. And thus, you need to find a solution. And I found that AT&T, the huge telecom operator in the US, experienced the same issue. They had to transform their business model, and they choose to retrain 280,000 people instead of hiring new talents. So they launched a platform, the training platform, constituted of 3 tools. The first tool is career profile tool. I'm an employee in AT&T. I just check the platform and I choose what is my future job. Then through the tool, I can check what are the gaps in terms of skills. And then there are a series of modules and programs and nano degrees. They call them nano degrees, where I can learn the new skills that I need for the future. This is a very interesting experience that we can use in the Islamic banking sphere. This is the first part. Now the second part. Before introducing the transformative business model of banks, let's see what are the outputs of the SWOT analysis. Let's start with weaknesses. Today we have a weak market share compared with global finance. In many countries, there is an absence of comprehensive legal and regulatory frameworks for Islamic banking. At the same time, from strengths perspective, we have new entrants that are not ensuring all the banking functions. The transformation function is still monopolized by banks, and the pace of fintech adoption by customers is not yet alarming. It's not very it's alarming, but it's not very alarming. The threats today, the regulation is getting toughened. New entrants with new simple business models are introduced to the market, and human resource seems to be a real issue today. In terms of opportunities, today we are trying to create national platforms to reduce the cost of treatment. Let me give you the example of the Monetary Agency of Singapore. They are trying to create a KYC platform where all banks are participating, so to avoid duplicating the cost of KYC treatments. We have financial inclusion efforts, and we have collaboration with new entrants and incumbents. The main output of this SWOT analysis is collaboration. Today, collaboration seems to be the main principle underlying the business model of the future of next generation of Islamic banks. We can have collaboration with other banks in terms of national platforms. We can have collaboration with other players from other sectors in order to offer and to provide co-branded services and products. So this is a scheme where I imagine that Islamic banks would be like a node of platforms, a node that connects different platforms. There are 3 types of platforms here. The first platforms is those who are shared with other banks. So like KYC platform in Singapore. We can have internal platforms like the training platform that AT&T launched. And we can have a third type of platforms, which is MSP, multi-sided platforms, and P2P, peer-to-peer platforms, and institution-to-peer platforms. Let me give some example for each type of platform, which means that everything in the bank will function through platforms. sorry. Let's start with the internal and shared platforms. For example, we have, through internal platforms, we can have the automation of all processes. Example, loan origination process, audit compliance, account reconciliation, all these functions will be taken charge by internal platforms. Two, we can customize training and contents at lower cost through like the example of AT&T. Three, we can create new utilities and avoid duplicating work between institutions like the KYC platform. And four, we can upgrade existing utilities like the clearing platform or the credit bureau through using new technologies like blockchain. So this will reduce the cost of transaction and internal costs. For the MSP, multi-sided platforms, which is a new concept, P2P and I2P, we have for the MSP, we have two strategies. Whether other platforms will open the door to banks in order to grant their financing, or banks will start their own platforms, then they will open the door to third parties. Let me give you an example. For example, Souq or Amazon in GCC, they are offering already products and services through their platform. They can open the door to Islamic banks in order to provide e-murabaha, which means we can buy products and services through e-murabaha. We can connect customers. For MSP, for example, I am a bank, I have customers. I can create a marketplace where my customers can meet, and if there are any business opportunities and they need financing, I can be involved at that time. So MSPs are a very interesting concept that we can develop in our countries and in Islamic banks. P2P and I2P. P2P, peer-to-peer platforms, their capacity to replace, according to many reports, their capacity to replace banks was overestimated. Now in US, for example, Lending Club is collaborating with banks in order to animate the platform. And we are moving from a P2P to a pure P2P model to an I2P model, where a bank can have its own P2P platform, then it can invest in this platform, moving from P2P to I2P. So to sum up, I think I didn't, I'm on time, I'm comfortable. Okay, there are four main conclusions. The first conclusion is that fintech is expected to be the major tool of this transformation. Nevertheless, fintech would not revolutionize financial services, it will only reform them. Second principle is that building collaborative platforms and ecosystems is the main principle underlying the business model transformation. We will not work alone. We need to work with other players. Third, we have to make sure that adopting a new technology requires the implementation of a completely new ecosystem, while making sure that the existing one would not be able to upgrade its components and thus safeguard its position in the market. This is very important. Sometimes we have a very good technology, but at the wrong time. We have to implement the whole ecosystem so that it can host the new technology. And finally, HR and talent development is the key factor of success. We don't have to work independently of this issue. It should be the main focus in any transformation. As you know, this exercise is very difficult of predicting the future. It should be conducted on a continuous basis. So if you ask me to do the same exercise next year, maybe I'll have different outputs. But it should be made on conducted on continuous basis. Thank you very much. And
you want to speak on that? Okay. You have a presentation? No presentation. Okay.
Just my face, my happy face. Assalamu alaikum, I'm very happy to speak to you here today. My presentation is just going to be me talking, very simple message about where I think Islamic finance is today, where I think it needs to go to in the future, and why technology actually is more than just enabling more efficient Islamic banking, but actually I think will help Islamic finance get closer to its actual promise of what Islamic finance should be. In terms of myself, my name is Khalid Halara. I am a managing director of my own consulting firm in Sukuk and ratings. But what's probably more interesting is that I'm also the chief strategy and risk officer for a fintech startup that I hope, inshallah, by December, January, we will do the very first Sukuk on the blockchain. And I will talk a bit about that more later. But I look at where Islamic finance is today. So in my previous role, I was head of the Middle East banking team for Moody's, and I was global head of Islamic finance for Moody's. And my portfolio, I had 60 banks, 45 conventional, 15 Islamic. Now, what I'm going to say may be controversial to some people in the audience, and it's not my intention to upset or offend, but it comes from the heart. When I say that Islamic banking at the moment, I don't think really fulfills its promise of what Islamic finance should be. I think a lot of it replicates the strengths and the weaknesses of conventional banks. And I can say that because I looked after conventional banks here, and I looked after Islamic banks here. And when I was doing the ratings and the risk and the analysis and the profits, I wouldn't say it's that different in terms of what it does for the economy. Because at the moment, banks take your deposits, finance cars, finance houses, finance mobile phones. You know, it's this consumption-driven economy. Now, for me, Islamic finance is more about asset finance, as I'm sure it's obvious. But to go to a more asset financing model is actually quite difficult. This is a different type of risk. Regulators don't necessarily want this different type of risk because it's a very different type of analysis, different regulations. So Islamic banking today, for me, is just the foundation of where Islamic finance needs to go. It's really only the beginning. From A to Z, I think we are at E or F. There's so much further to go, but it's the platform where now we can go to the next stage, and for this is why we need technology. So technology is already being used to make banking more efficient, customer acquisition, mobile banking, etc. But this is not changing the nature of Islamic banking. What I believe is creating more of an investment type culture. If you look at all of the problems that we have in the world today, it's not an accident, it's about debt. Too much debt at the country level, too much debt at the corporate level, too much debt at the personal level. And what has been the solution to the crisis? More debt. This is not going to end well. At some point, it's going to end even worse maybe than the last time. So for things to change, we need to have financing that's more about investment rather than lending, rather than debt. Now, the project I'm working on called Blossom Finance, it's a digital platform on the blockchain. And what we are doing, our first project, is for microfinance in Indonesia. We're going to launch a micro sukuk, maximum $500,000, $1 million. So nothing really big on the scale of Islamic finance that is 2 trillion. But on this side, we are going to fund micro entrepreneurs, microfinance projects, the community, the people, the low-income people who need our help, who need the financing. But what's more interesting is where the money is coming from. We have launched our website. We have, done a bit of social media and these things. We have 1,400 people who have registered their interest to invest in social impact projects. Now, these people are from New Zealand, they're from Australia, some are Muslim, some are non-Muslim, but this, for me, is what Islamic finance should be heading to, bringing in new funds, maybe not typical deposit type funds, but people who are looking to invest, people who want to sort of share the profit and also, crucially, share the risk. See, when I put my money in a bank, I don't really want any risk, as was said before. My deposit should be safe. So that's why banks may not necessarily be the right type of place to have these type of investments, but the banks maybe should start to have subsidiaries where they focus more on supporting investment into the real economy. So going back to the Blossom Finance, we have all these investors who are registered from all over the world. And here we have projects. So the first project is microfinance in Indonesia. The second project, inshallah, should be some waste disposal, environmental waste disposal to try to clean up the environment. Third project, funding a hospital expansion wing. So these are small projects. These aren't your Saudi Arabia $6 billion sukuk It's not your United Kingdom 200 million to cook. These I will leave to the banks. That's what I used to do before, or that's what I'm doing on the consulting side. But on the Blossom side, I'm trying to pull in these retail type customers, these people who are Sharia sensitive, who are socially motivated, who want to do something good for the community, and the investment amounts will be $100, $500, not 50,000, 100,000. Because when you look again at the people in the economy, who is it that the wealth is going to? Who is getting richer? The people who get richer are those who are owning assets. If you own land, if you own business, if you own equities, your wealth is growing. If you're in the lower income segment, you typically hold your funds in cash. Cash is not invested. Cash doesn't generate a return. So Islamic finance is also about creating opportunities for people to invest on one side and financing socially motivated projects on this side. And that's where I think banks can have a key role, because you have the client base. And it's interesting to see in Malaysia, where they used to have everything was a profit sharing investment account, but really some of them were not really profit sharing. They had in their Financial Services Act a new regulation that said, look, these Islamic deposits behave like deposits. They're protected by the government. But here, you're going to have a new investment type, I won't call it deposit, an investment type account. But really, on this account, a big red warning that says you can lose your money here. Now, I was speaking to one bank CFO in Malaysia. He's had 30% of his customers shift from these deposit type investments into genuine profit share type investments. And these investments actually are going into government sukuk or financing, electricity companies. So still the big ticket projects, but it's interesting to see that even amongst the retail customer, there is an interest in more investment type projects that give you an investment type return. So whether it's, instead of getting 0.5% on your savings account, 4.5%, 5% on some investments. So there is an appetite amongst the retail customer base, the Islamic retail customer base, maybe to put some of their funds into something that's a bit more risky. So this is where I think in the future, Islamic finance needs to build on the foundation of the past. But to do this, you need technology. So if I look at what we're doing at Blossom Finance, there is no way we could accept $100 or $200 for an investment, because the KYC, the compliance, the technology cost of onboarding one customer for such a small amount, it wouldn't work. The minimum threshold would have to be $10,000 or something, but then you completely cut out that lower segment of the market. So technology allows you to onboard customers in a far cheaper way than you ever could do before. And also, even on the investment side, we can create an investment for 500,000, for 1 million. That is still economic to do in terms of transaction costs, compliance costs, and this whole infrastructure now can help bring Islamic finance closer to that investment culture, and actually, what I believe, closer to the promise of Islamic, which is not just repeating the same strengths and weaknesses of what the world already has, but really helping to generate a distinct identity, social finance, environmental, helping to support the community, and hopefully take Islamic finance further in that direction. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brother Khalid. You began with somewhat of a maybe a pessimistic view, but in the end you positively wrapped it up by telling us, giving us some real life examples of how to put into practice some of the ideas presented by Dr. Ahmed. Dr. Saeed, up to you.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. I thank AAOIFI for giving me this opportunity to speak to this respected audience of scholars and experts. In fact, my points of presentation or general points are related to the topic or to the topics presented, sent to us in the invitation, where I'm going to focus on the major points and I will leave the rest to the discussion. When it comes to the major development of Islamic thought, I don't know whether this is okay. I will try to make it louder. Okay. So when it comes to the major development of Islamic finance, I think it's very important to refer to the core objectives of IDB, which is one of the first Islamic banking initiated, and one of its core objective is promoting social and economic development in Muslim countries and communities worldwide, delivering impact at scale, and also discussing providing the infrastructures, which means that the core aim of Islamic finance in its initiation was to serve the real economy. But with the starting of Islamic banking, there was the problem of scarcity or constraint of products, where there was an over relying on murabaha in that period, and it was from the first beginning it was justified, but there was also slow improvement in terms of innovation. Of course, the innovative part was started in maybe early 2000, where there was good improvement in terms of laws, regulations, some products, and some innovative approach in terms of product standardization, especially with the AAOIFI introducing new standards, some innovative products related to sukuk issuance, and all those innovations that witnessed in the early 2000s. But the post-global financial crisis has witnessed what we call the reassessing of the existing Islamic financial industry, where there was a huge critique on mimicking the conventional banking system and conventional banking products, where some scholars, they have criticized even some sukuk issuance, and we are all aware of those critics. And then, after 2010, 12, 13, there was a huge move towards what we call the social responsible financing, SDG, EDG, and all those existing approach, especially with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, where we can see now the Islamic finance industry going back to the first goals of Islamic Development Bank, where we have socially impact financing, where there is an added value to the economy, which is, for me, even this meeting of general standardization and previous conferences of ISRA and other, and also World Bank, discussing the social finance as socially responsible finance, is the right move to go back to the fundamentals, of course, without ignoring or discarding the advancement of technology, advancement of fintech, and advancement of digital banking. With regards to of course, in terms of whether we should be optimistic or pessimistic, of course, as a Muslim, we should be always optimistic. And also, we should learn from our mistakes. Instead of being negative, we should be positive to benefit from our mistakes. And I believe that one of the cause of being optimistic, first of all, is the huge increased number of Islamic financial institutions that will give us a better opportunity to show the credibility of Islamic banking, and also the strong support of supporting bodies, especially AAOIFI, IFSB, CBAFI, and other supporting bodies, and also their willingness to assess, revisit their organization in terms of governance and in terms of standards. And we have witnessed AAOIFI reviewing so many standards and coming up with so many new standards, which is a very good move in terms of improving Islamic finance. And also, there is one of the causes of being optimistic is the new generation of Sharia scholars with critical mindset and great aim for comprehensive Sharia compliance and innovation. Now, and this is a very good approach to have this succession plan not over-relying on specific number of scholars, but to give opportunity to new scholars to get exposed in Islamic finance and to deliver maybe similar or even maybe better than the existing scholars. And what is good in this, I can say in this last 3 to 4 years, is that we can say, unfortunately or fortunately, we're pushed by the conventional banking system, by the conventional counterpart, to focus on socially responsible financing. Though we should be the one championing the socially responsible financing, but we kept quiet, unfortunately, for a long period of time. But when the United Nations came with the the SDG, sustainable development core goals, and when there is an ESG, when it's socially responsible financing, socially responsible investment, we came back to have a special focus on those things. So we should be the championing this one, but nevertheless, it's a good how to say reassessment of our situation as Islamic banking industry, where nowadays there is a huge emphasis on socially responsible financing, and the question of whether numbers matters or the quality delivery is more as important as the numbers. Because at the end, if we can have the Islamic finance reaching 2 trillion, 3 trillion, and the level of indebtedness is going beyond the limits, so we have added nothing to the Islamic finance. We have made the shareholders richer and make the society poorer and more in debt. There are some countries where the debt over the income of the individuals is 92, 93%, which means if he's receiving 100 ringgit or $100, he's from day one indebted by $93, and what is remaining in his pocket is just $7. So, which is a very important and a very, very crucial issue when it comes to Islamic finance. I will not go into details, but I will just focus on 2 things. With regards to the competitiveness and sustainability in terms of Islamic finance, I believe that what is important if we are holding the label of Islamic finance is, yes, sustainability, competitiveness is important, but competitiveness within the sticking to the fundamental of Islamic finance is very important. We should not compromise the fundamentals of Islamic finance, the Sharia compliance, because of the notion of competitiveness to conventional. I think it's not easy to jump from 0.75% to 50% of the global finance. It's not, yes, it's good to reach that competitive level, but not at the expense of the compliance to Sharia. Optimizing, I think what we need in terms of competitiveness and sustainability, of optimal benefit and implementation of the latest development and innovation in financial industry, benefiting from the legal development, regulatory, technical, now the fintech, all those area of development. AAOIFI role in this area in terms of standardization, harmonization is crucial, as AAOIFI needs, in my view, first to upgrade its existing standards, which it's doing well in this area, and also issuing new standards, working towards harmonization of standards. Because I did discuss with people of AAOIFI is that instead of imposing the standards, I think presenting the standards, upgrading the standard to the stage where they are comprehensive, convincing quality standards that all countries will be more than happy to adopt, because they are comprehensive, they are practical, and they will uplift of the existing Islamic banking to the highest level. And I believe that AAOIFI should start first by going for harmonization meeting, and this conference is a very important point of start, meeting all the different jurisdiction, going first for harmonization, and reaching the stage of standardization, and why not unification of standards, where it will be easy for Islamic finance to work together. Because the big issue of Islamic finance is cross-border transaction. If you don't have harmonization of standard or standardization, it's going to be very difficult to have cross-border transaction, especially when it comes to liquidity management. I believe that the future of Islamic bank, this is my last point of the discussion. I think the future of Islamic banking in the next 30 years will have two possible scenarios. Either we stick to the traditional approach of banking, where we will just try our best to adjust the conventional banking to make them Sharia compliant, and also stick to the traditional approach of introducing products where there is a mimicking of the existing one, and also trying to be too liberal, using or sometimes abusing the concept of maqasid and maslaha to focus on the competitiveness instead of sustainability. Or the second scenario, go back to fundamental of Islamic banking by stressing on social responsibility financing, value added and sustainable development, and adopting the latest development in terms of legal and technology. I have other points that I may discuss them later. Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
ورحمة الله وبركاته. جزاك الله خير دكتور سعيد. Dr. Muhammad Jamal, do you want to comment on some of the points, or would you like me to ask you some questions?
No, thank you very much. I can comment on some of the points. First of all, I'd like to thank the AAOIFI for the invitation. It's great to be here. It's great to see that standardization is taking a place it should have taken many years ago. Now, the theme of this panel is the outlook for the Islamic finance industry in the next 10 years. I am optimistic, but before telling you why I am optimistic, let me start by talking about one of the most important developments that happened in the industry until now. I think a few years ago, when we used to talk about standardization, at best, people would look at us as if we're coming from a different planet. People were telling us, no, it's impossible to achieve. People were telling us there's too many different interpretations, too many different jurisdictions. Standardization is impossible. It will kill innovation. Now this mindset is changing, and this is a big achievement. Yesterday, there was the signing of the MOU between 3 major standard setters, and I think this is a big achievement for the Islamic finance industry. But standards are important, but what is even more important is the implementation of the standards. So the next challenge that the industry will face is how regulators would transform these standards into law. Now, on the outlook for the industry of Islamic finance, why am I optimistic? I am optimistic because the principle of Islamic finance are right. It took the word a major financial crisis in 2008 to understand that we need to move from a paradigm where the profit is private and the loss is social, and where we need to introduce some profit and loss sharing in the financial transactions. It took the word also major political instability in some countries to understand that growth has to be inclusive and prosperity has to be shared. Guess what? All these exist already in the principle of Islamic finance. The only problem is that we haven't applied the principle correctly in the past. So in order to move forward for the industry of Islamic finance, what is really needed is to look again at the principle and try to apply them in a stringent way. Let me give you a couple of examples. The Basel Committee for Banking Supervision and international regulators have introduced a concept that is called additional loss absorbing capital, where private sector creditors are asked to share a portion of the loss if a bank comes to the verge of the bankruptcy. This is profit and loss sharing. In Islamic finance, we have that concept already. Mudaraba sukuk that can be used to achieve the exact same objective. The Sustainable Development Goals, and we talked about them, Doctor. I think if you look at the products available for the Islamic finance industry, we have waqf, we have zakat, which have not been used in an optimal way until now, because waqf and zakat can allow to offer affordable housing, affordable healthcare, affordable education, and overall contribute to the shared prosperity. So yes, I am optimistic. I think the world is slowly moving toward the principle of Islamic finance through the Sustainable Development Goals, through the additional loss absorbing mechanism in financial transactions. And what the industry needs to do is to look again at its own principle and try to apply them in a more stringent way. Maybe one last comment on standardization versus harmonization, where I have a slight disagreement with Dr. Saeed, is to say that standardization is not achievable, or to say that we need to harmonize between the different countries, is similar to saying that the Basel Committee for Banking Supervision is not doing its mission. The Basel Committee for Banking Supervision comes with a standard, and then it's the job of the local regulators to adopt the standards to their local reality. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You made an important, pertinent point regarding the relative negligence of some very robust institutions in Islam as a whole, and I don't say Islamic finance, that can address the issues of social development, the creation of wealth, the equitable distribution of wealth, most importantly, waqf and zakat. But there's a big disconnect between these two institutions on the one hand and Islamic financial institutions on the other hand. What do we need in terms of regulation, in terms of changing mindsets? What do we need to bridge this gap? Maybe Dr. Khalid?
Actually, I was in Indonesia just last week when the Indonesian Deputy Central Bank Governor announced the Wakaf links to Cook. And I think what was really interesting in in his presentation, how he said public perception of Wakaf, untransparent, lack of governance, poor returns. There was a negative perception that if you wanted to use your wealth in a more productive way, that these institutions that were more religiously motivated weren't necessarily the best institutions to help manage wealth and grow wealth and create that perpetual wealth. So he was proposing that why, like the financial sector, the amount of money in the Wakaf sector is so meaningful, it should come under central bank, and that the Wakaf sector should be regulated just like any other subsector of finance because of the numbers involved, the diligence, the regulation, the governance. And I thought that was very telling. It hadn't occurred to me before, but it seems like, as you say, zakat and Wakaf is kind of removed from the financial sector. And the financial sector has, by and large, good controls, good protections, good governance, management of conflicts, transparency, financial sector regulation. So I think for me, that's actually a very important first step, that these elements where there are very large sums of money involved and ostensibly used for a productive purpose need to fall under some kind of regulation to the same skill and diligence as other central bank regulations. So I thought that was a step in the right direction. And that sort of brings those into that sort of Islamic finance ecosystem. You have the banks, you have the funds, you have zakat. They're all aspects of money and wealth that you try to channel to a social and productive purpose. And I think that was a good starting point that they're going to try in Indonesia.
Thank you very much. I believe that the work aspect in terms of contributing to the uplifting of the society is very important. And just to highlight that Malaysia has a good initiative in terms of facilitating the implementation of work in the financial system, as they have included in the social responsible investment in them guidelines and rules the work as part of the sukuk issuance that can be exempted from tax and have tax exemption and tax benefit. And second, there are in banking system there are what we call it account, which means in terms of mudaraba, where the bank will contribute and the customer contribute a portion of his profit to a work fund that will contribute to the society, which is in I think micro approach. And we have done, ISRA has consulted, has done a comprehensive research and project structure of cash work, temporary cash work sukuk, where we have presented this one in United Arab Emirates, in Saudi Arabia, in Malaysia, in Canada, in Europe. And recently the Islamic Development Bank, they have appointed ISRA Consultancy to be the consultant to issue sukuk waqf, which is going to be worth of around 200 million. This sukuk waqf, which is going to be facilitating the contribution to the development of Muslim countries. I believe that in terms of jurisdiction, in terms of regulation, in terms of guidelines, it's very important to enhance transparency, because I agree, when it comes to work, you give and you forget and there will be abuse. A few years ago, there was a study saying that 70% of the work contribution is exhausted by the administrative cost, which means, and in one case there was contribution to work where the management, they have purchased an OD8 or the latest model of car where it's exorbitant price. So that's why the governance wise and also I think the central bank and Securities Commission can play a big role in developing this work.
Yeah, thank you. But I think Dr. Muhammad, and we'll come to Dr. Ahmed.
Yeah. I think earlier this year, I attended a conference where some of the panelists were suggesting that waqf and zakat money should be used to invest in the stock market. And I thought this in the sukuk market. And I thought this is a very bad idea. The reason why I thought this is a very bad idea is because waqf and zakat have two specific roles in Islamic finance and in Sharia. And they have to be focused on fulfilling these mandates, lifting the society, ensuring sustainable growth, and ensuring better wealth distribution within the society. And I think one way to achieve that is similar to the way that Indonesia did with the zakat. They have a structure in place that manages the zakat and distributes it according to specific guidelines with stringent governance. And similarly for waqf, it needs to be managed centrally with very clear objectives, very clear governance, and a conservative way of management, in a sense that the primary objective should be how can we fulfill the social objective of waqf instead of using the money to buy an ODA8 or to deplete 70% of the money in the operating costs.
Okay, so I'm seeing that this waqf and zakat issue is touching maybe some raw nerves, but we'll close with Dr. Ahmed and then we'll continue to another point.
I think there is a lot of means of complementarity between Islamic finance and what we call traditional social finance Islamic social finance institutions like waqf. Let me give the example of Morocco. In Morocco, we have a waqf law that stipulates that the waqf administration can issue what we call in the law sanadat waqfiyya, but it has never been initiated. I think waqf as an institution requires modern tools and instruments. And I think with Islamic banking in Morocco, maybe these instruments can be initiated. through Islamic banks and through Islamic capital markets once available in Morocco.
Yeah, one thing which is, I think is very lacking in this area is not enough data. We don't have a systemized platform for collecting data and segmentation of data, and therefore building on it. And even zakah, take zakah, let alone waqf. Waqf is much more complicated and much more latent and hidden. But zakah, there are some estimates that the annual amount or value of zakah in the Islamic world is at least 40 billion. It goes to over 100 billion. I mean, that's a very, very big difference, a very big gap. Some people even put it over 100 billion. The point is, these are huge revenues that we are failing to touch and to channel in our area. Moving now to another, very quickly before we open the floor for questions and comments, because we have only till 12:30, and this has been emphasized, but I shouldn't pass the limit of 12:30. The area of what's holding back Islamic finance from addressing its real mission and fulfilling its real goals. Some of the points that all of you addressed and touched upon. What is the real hindrance? Now we know where we're failing, but what is hindering us from going there? Is it the mindset of the bankers whom we keep in charge of our banks, the executive management? Is it the mindset of the capital providers, the board of directors? Is it the regulators who still haven't made up that necessarily leap in order to remove the handicaps that are holding back Islamic finance? Because I think we all agree that we are at best tolerated in the banking system. We are very much tangential to the banking system. We saw the figures here. After 40 years in the economy, we are not even 1% of the economy, of the banking economy. So what is it that's holding us back? Is it the regulations? Is it the mindset of the executive management or the capital providers?
I think human nature. You see, it took the global financial crisis for people to realize that wealth creation needs to be inclusive. So human nature is to privatize the gains, as Dr. Demark eloquently said, and socialize the losses. So if you leave the industry to your own devices, banks serve shareholders. It's the state, it's the government that needs to take a view that I want social cohesion, I want wealth distribution, and the government, in theory, should reflect the will of the people. So you need the people to decide that this is important, then the government to come in from the top and to say, look, financial inclusion, wealth distribution, all of these elements are key, and then that will feed through into the banks. But you can't expect banks who serve shareholders first to necessarily take this as their mission to support low-income people. Now, that said, it's actually becoming in the mindset of customers that actually they want this from their bank. So now it may be a brand differentiator. It may actually affect a bank's profitability if customers see you as a non-social bank and this bank is social. Maybe customers will move towards that. So it starts with us as a mindset, but then the structures in place need to make it happen. I don't think you can just leave the banks to do it by themselves.
I think what's hindering the industry is the reality of the market. There's a certain way of doing things. Everyone is accustomed to that way. If I want to buy a car, I want to go to my bank and ask them for a loan to buy it. And I want to minimize the cost as much as possible. So if I go to the Islamic bank and I am told that you're going to pay 50 basis points more or 100 basis points more because your product is Islamic, every rational economic agent will go with the cheapest option. So the reality of the market is hindering or has hindered the development of the industry. And I think the industry has shifted, fortunately, from an industry where what is being sold is the Sharia compliant nature to an industry where what is being sold is not only the Sharia compliant nature, but also the economic added value. As a Muslim, if I'm offered two similar propositions, one is Sharia compliant and one is not, I would go naturally with the Sharia compliant proposition. Now, I think what we need to agree on is that there will always be a way to do banking that is similar to conventional banking, because this is how the world has been operating for the past 400 centuries. We cannot change it on an overnight basis. And once we get that first line of activity up and running, we can start doing some more interesting products, like products with profit and loss sharing. And this is exactly what Malaysia did. Malaysia, they came up with a roadmap to develop Islamic finance. They started by developing products that are similar to the conventional products. Once the industry is up and running, they said, now we want to move from profit-sharing investment accounts that do share the profit and not the losses, to profit-sharing investment accounts that do share both profit and losses. But at the same time, and this is an important point, as a banker, if you're selling that product to your customer, number one, the customer has to understand the risk. And number two, the customer has to be properly remunerated for the risk. So don't come to me as a rating agency and tell me, I want to do a sukuk with profit and loss sharing instrument, but I want you to rate it at the same level as your senior unsecured credits. No. And I want to price it at the same level as a senior unsecured credit. No. There's higher risk, so investors have to be compensated for this higher risk.
I think if we go on that line, we will maybe raise some hues and cries from the audience, maybe from the platform as well. But since we only have less than 5 minutes, I'll open the floor now. أي سؤال أو تعليق يعني نرجو أن يوجه إلى عضو المنصة ويسمى الشخص المطلوب منه الإجابة. نعم دكتور أشرف.
Barakallahu feekum, all of the speakers. So my question is for Mr. Khalid. I think the project that you're working on is very interesting, Blossom. My question is, how can we use modern technology to manage the risk of the investments? Even in Malaysia, a lot of people mention Malaysia. We have the investment account where we very clearly disclose to the customers that this is not guaranteed and you may lose money. But when you look at the rates that are being given and offered between the fixed deposit, Islamic, and investment account, where none of your principal or profit is guaranteed, you're talking about a few basis points difference. So it really begs the question, are people really willing to take the risk? Are they really ready to lose because they are pricing this the same as the guaranteed instrument? So I think that's really the problem with profit and loss sharing, which is, do people understand the risk? That's one thing. The other thing is, how can we use technology, you alluded to it, to manage the risk of these assets? Are you looking at anything particular in your work with Blossom on that side, on the managing the risk on the asset side?
Take one more question and then we'll address you.
شكرا سعادة الرئيس وشكرا للمتحدثين. الحقيقة تطرقت للموضوع في غاية الأهمية، هو الأوقاف والزكاة. وللأسف الشديد هذه بدأت رغم أنها من بداية الإسلام أكثر من 1400 سنة، إلا أنه أيضا التطور اللي حصل فيها تطور محدود جدا. فيما يتعلق بالأوقاف الدول الغربية تجاوزتها بكثير. أنا أعتقد أنه ليس هو موضوع المصارف الإسلامية أو غيرها فيما يتعلق بتطوير الأوقاف والزكاة في البلاد الإسلامية. لو رأينا الواقع لوجدنا أن هناك هيئات متخصصة للأوقاف، هناك أيضا هيئات متخصصة للزكاة، وهناك المصارف، وهناك الأسواق المالية. الربط بين في ديسكونكت بين الهيئات المتخصصة وبين أيضا الاستفادة. أنا أعتقد في رأيي أنه في فرصة ذهبية جدا للاستفادة من المصارف في تعزيز دور الأوقاف والزكاة، للاستفادة من الأسواق المالية في تعزيز دور الأوقاف والزكاة. ولذلك نرى أن أنظمة الحوكمة والشفافية والوضوح فيما يتعلق بالمصارف وفيما يتعلق بالكابيتال ماركت كبيرة جدا. الديسكونكت اللي بين الجهات ممكن أنه العمل عليه لرفع معيار عملية الحقيقة الحوكمة، وبدأت الآن في ال3 و5 سنوات الأخيرة بدأت بعض الدول. أنا يعني العام الماضي في المملكة العربية السعودية، مو بالعام الماضي حقيقة، قبل 3 شهور أطلق أول صندوق وقفي يخضع لهيئة السوق المالية في المملكة العربية السعودية، وبالتالي جميع أنظمة الحوكمة على الصناديق الحقيقة الاستثمارية سوف يطبق على الصندوق الوقفي، وهذا زاد عملية الشفافية وزاد عملية الحقيقة الولاء والانتماء للرقابة. يعني بدل أنه ما هو فقط مجرد عقار أو شيء يختلف، صارت صناديق وقفية. نفس العملية فيما يتعلق بجباية الزكاة. أنا أرى أنه المصارف الإسلامية عندها هيوج ديتا ممكن الاستفادة منها فيما يتعلق بجباية الزكاة. لو صار الربط أيضا بين هيئات الزكاة والمصارف فيما يتعلق بالجباية سترتفع بشكل كبير جدا. بعض الدول بدأت تفكر في هذا التفكير. شكرا.
شكرا. نعم تفضل. Dr. Ashraf's question was addressed to Khalid.
Sure. So on Blossom, you're right. In terms of if you're going to offer an investment risk type product, the returns have to be interesting. And so in the case of Blossom's first sukuk, ostensibly the profit rate should be in the region of 10%, but it's a genuine sukuk al-mudaraba. So there will be a profit share of, let's say, 60-40, 70-30 between the microfinance institution and the investors. So again, there's a reason why the expected profit rate might be around 10%, because there's high risk with this type of financing. But this is the idea. This is why we're trying to move Islamic finance into that direction. So you definitely have to offer higher rates of return for this product to even be interesting to the retail customer. As to the question on technology in sort of risk analysis, we're not using it personally at this point in time because, frankly, each project is going to be different, and we will have to sort of assess the risk, frankly, in a manual type of way. We are trying to encourage the microfinance institutions maybe to start getting rated, but because of the high cost, technology will have to be part of that solution of risk assessment. So hopefully that answers your question.
فقط إضافة لما ذكر السيد المدير التنفيذي. أنا I don't know whether I was in English or عربي. نعم. أنا لا أرى مانعا حرجا في إدراج في استفادة سوق الأوراق المالية من الصكوك. إصدار صكوك وقفية إذا كان المانديت واضح، الغرض منها غرض يعني poverty alleviation، وحتى استعين بمستثمرين أراضي ميتة، عقارات غير مستغلة. يعني قصة مسجد سنغافورة اللي كان لا شيء ثم طور إلى مباني ضخمة، يعني في الصكوك المشاركة، يعني أدخل في صندوق الوقف السنغافوري مئات الملايين، سهلت لهم قضايا الدفن وقضايا الاستثمار، من مسجد في برايم اريا إلى طابقين من مسجد ومجمع سكني وهايبر ماركت وما إلى ذلك. ميزة سوق الأوراق المالية إذا كان أردنا الاستفادة من وقفها أنها highly transparent وفيه highly disclosure بالنسبة للشفافية والإفصاح عالية جدا. ما يقدر يعني يستغل في الإدارة المانجمنت فيز 70 أو 60%، ولكن يبقى التارجت الأوبجكتيف الهدف هو خدمة مجتمعية، القضاء على الفقر، توفير فرص العمل، القضايا الصحية وما إلى ذلك. هذا قصدي. فاستفادة الجهات المالية سوق الأوراق المالية أو المصارف يعني الاستفادة منها أمر محبذ إذا كان انضبطنا بضوابط الحوكمة. بارك الله فيك.
أشكركم جميعا على مشاركتكم وما أدليتم به وتفضلتم بالجميع انتفع. نختم بكلمة من نصف دقيقة الجميع. ترون يعني أين المصرفية الإسلامية اليوم عما كانت عليه في أول مسيرتها، ليس من حيث تحقيق المقاصد ولكن من حيث الالتزام. هل المصرفية الإسلامية أكثر التزاما، أصح في التزامها، أم أنها يعني انحرفت شيئا ما؟ وبالتالي هذا يعكس على نظرتنا للمستقبل. ونختم بهذا.
I think we should be proud of what Islamic finance has accomplished. 30 years ago, 40 years ago, people had this idea of launching the Islamic banking and Islamic financial industry, and now we're talking about a $2.1 trillion industry, which is non-negligible. As for the future, I think, again, the future is bright because the principle of Islamic finance are right. And if you draw a parallel between what's going on in the world and the principle, you can see that the world is slowly converging to the principle of Islam.
I believe that what we have done throughout these 40 years, I call it an exploratory phase, مرحلة استكشافية, where we have identified our weaknesses, shortcomings, our strengths, and we start trusting our values and fundamentals. I think that is the very positive part of the Islamic finance during these 40 years. Now, the coming 30 years, yes, we are optimistic, but it depends on the two strengths that they are moving or riding the Islamic finance. The complacent approach, traditional approach, going for liberal or mimicking the conventional, it will drag the Islamic finance maybe similarly to what was before and maybe worse. And the other approach, which is establishing or enhancing the fundamentals, going for standardization. Of course, standardization for me, because of the mindset of the different jurisdiction, I believe that it has to go through harmonization as the initial phase for standardization, because you cannot call a person to tell him, please, you have to follow the standardization of specific standard setting. But I think the transitory phase is harmonization, and it's a must to go to standardization. I believe with the awareness, with the new scholar generation of scholars, with the new, I think, awareness from the experts, the legal people, I believe that it's going to improve highly and moving towards the right direction.
I think I see Islamic finance sort of splitting into segments. I think you'll have Islamic banking that will continue to grow in its own fashion. But I think there's much more awareness now around these social values, and whether it's the United Nations or Malaysia, etc. And I really hope that this gains its own momentum, and that will sort of make transparent, because at the moment in the minds of the customer, when everything is labeled Islamic finance, it's hard to see where is the real value. It just looks like a bank. What is it doing? So I think banking sector, this more investment type Islamic social finance, if you want to call it, and the waqaf and the zakat is really a sleeping giant. If these hundreds of billions can be brought into a well-governed, transparent, accountable ecosystem, then it will double the size of Islamic finance overnight. But not overnight, but I really think that's the game changer that needs to be brought into this umbrella, and then that will really make it a powerful force globally.
To conclude, I have two points. First point is that during the last 50 years, Islamic banks were imitating Islamic conventional banks in terms of business models, not in terms of Sharia advice, in terms of business model. and in terms of strategy. And the challenge today is to have an independent personality for the Islamic banking model. The second conclusion is that the first generation of experts told us that Islamic banking will bring prosperity to economy. But after these 15 years, we found that, in fact, this is the opposite. We need a structured economy to prosper. What is hindering really is Islamic banking is the structure of our economies, and we need to have better regulation, better legislation, and a better judiciary system. Thank you.
شكرا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guide us to what will be beneficial for Islamic banking and for the world as a whole. الجلسة هذه طبعا بثت مباشرة على الهواء ومسجلة لمن أراد أن يرجع لليوتيوب. هذه الجلسة وكل جميع جلسات المؤتمر والمواد المقدمة أيضا موجودة على موقع AAOIFI. وشكر الله لكم وسبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك.